The morning started like any other, or so I thought. The sun streamed through the windows, and the coffee machine hummed softly in the background. But then I saw it. A note sitting on the kitchen counter, written in Lisa's messy scrawl. My stomach tightened as I picked it up, the words hitting me like a gut punch. I'm done with you and your boring life. I'm taking everything. And this house is sold, by the way. Enjoy what's left. I read the note twice, letting the words sink in. Instead of panic or despair, I felt a strange calmness settle over me. Maybe it was the culmination of months, no, years, of watching our marriage deteriorate. Or maybe it was the fact that I had been expecting this move. Lisa thought she had blindsided me, but in truth, I'd seen this coming from a mile away. Reaching for my phone, I texted her back, "Saw your note. Thanks for the heads up." It was short, clipped, and intentionally vague. She didn't need to know yet that I had already anticipated her betrayal and set my own plans in motion. As I sipped my coffee, my mind raced back to the early days of our relationship. Lisa had been magnetic, the kind of woman who could walk into a room and command attention without saying a word. I had fallen for her confidence, her ambition, her fire. But somewhere along the way, that fire had turned into something destructive. Her dissatisfaction with our life, my life, became a constant source of tension. She wanted more excitement, more luxury, more of everything I wasn't willing to give. I put down my coffee and stared at the note again. It was a declaration of war, but Lisa had underestimated her opponent. I wasn't the naive, complacent husband she believed me to be. Months ago, I had started preparing for this very scenario. While she thought she was orchestrating her grand escape, I was quietly building a safety net to ensure her schemes would crumble before they even began. The first step had been the accounts. I'd noticed small discrepancies months ago, charges I didn't recognize, withdrawals I hadn't authorized. Instead of confronting Lisa immediately, I moved our joint savings into a private account under my name. It wasn't just about protecting my finances. It was about gaining the upper hand. I wanted her to think she was in control while I worked behind the scenes to safeguard everything she was so eager to take. Then there was the house. Lisa's arrogance had always been her downfall, and this time was no exception. She assumed the house belonged to both of us, but she was wrong. When we refinanced last year, I'd ensured the property was legally under my name alone. It was a detail she had overlooked, too busy dreaming of the life she would build without me. I sat down at the dining table, spreading out the papers I'd been gathering over the past few months. Bank statements, credit card bills, even some grainy photos from a private investigator I'd hired to follow her business trips. Every piece of evidence painted a clear picture of Lisa's betrayal and gave me the tools I needed to dismantle her plans. I couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness as I sorted through the documents. This wasn't how I had envisioned our life together. When we first got married, I had dreams of building a future with Lisa, of growing old together in the home we'd worked so hard to create. But those dreams had long since withered under the weight of her contempt. The sound of a car pulling out of the driveway snapped me out of my thoughts. Lisa was already gone, likely off to meet her new accomplice, Ryan. I'd learned about him through the investigator, her so-called business consultant, who was more interested in her money than her charm. I didn't need to confront her yet. There would be time for that. For now, I had the advantage, and I intended to keep it. As I folded the note and placed it back on the counter, I felt a strange sense of resolve. Lisa thought she was the one calling the shots, but she couldn't have been more wrong. This was my game now, and I was just getting started. The betrayal stung, but it also lit a fire within me. A determination to protect what was mine and to show Lisa that she wasn't as clever as she thought. She had made her move, and now it was my turn. Looking back, the warning signs were everywhere. Lisa hadn't exactly been subtle in her disdain for the life we had built together. I used to think of her criticisms as harmless jabs, her way of pushing me to do better. But as the years went by, those jabs became sharper, more cutting, until they felt less like encouragement and more like contempt. It wasn't always like this. When we first got married, Lisa loved that I was a software developer. She'd tell her friends with pride that I was the brains of the operation. I thought my steady income and stable career were the foundation of our partnership. But as time went on, Stability wasn't enough for Lisa. She wanted excitement, spontaneity, a lifestyle straight out of a luxury magazine. And I wasn't delivering. I first noticed something was off when her shopping habits spiraled out of control. Lisa had always enjoyed the finer things, but suddenly, she wasn't just treating herself. She was indulging in shopping sprees that rivaled celebrities. Designer handbags, expensive jewelry, shoes that cost more than our mortgage payment. She bought it all without a second thought. When I questioned her, she'd laugh it off, saying, "We deserve nice things. Don't you want to enjoy life?" Then came the phone calls. Late at night, hushed whispers in the other room. At first, I chalked it up to work. Lisa had taken on some consulting projects, and I assumed the calls were related. But when I caught a glimpse of her phone one evening, the contact name wasn't a colleague, it was Ryan, her business consultant. She brushed it off when I asked, saying he was just helping her with a new venture. I wanted to believe her, so I let it go. But the doubt lingered. The absences were harder to ignore. Lisa started traveling more frequently, claiming she needed to attend meetings out of town. At first, I didn't think much of it. She had always been ambitious, and I admired her drive. But the trips became more frequent, and her explanations became vaguer. One weekend, she left for a supposed business retreat, only to return with a tan that screamed beach vacation rather than corporate seminar. It wasn't just her behavior that raised red flags. It was her words. Lisa had a way of making her dissatisfaction with our life painfully clear. "You're so predictable," she'd say, her tone dripping with disdain. "Don't you ever want more than this?" I'd try to explain that I was happy with our life, that I found fulfillment in my work and our home. But she'd roll her eyes, muttering something about how I just didn't get it. One night, we were having dinner, and she dropped a comment that stuck with me. "You know, if we don't change things soon, I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this." She said it casually, like she was talking about a TV show that had lost its appeal. But I knew what she meant. She wasn't just talking about our routine. She was talking about us. I started to pay closer attention, keeping track of the inconsistencies in her stories, the unusual charges on our credit card statements, and the way she always seemed to be one step ahead of me in conversations about money or future plans. It became clear that Lisa wasn't just unhappy. She was plotting something, and I wasn't going to let her blindside me. The real turning point came when I found a receipt for a luxury hotel stay, dated for a weekend. She was supposed to be at her retreat. The room was booked for 2. My hands trembled as I held the receipt, the evidence of her betrayal staring back at me. In that moment, the doubt that had been gnawing at me solidified into certainty. Lisa wasn't just dissatisfied with our life. She was actively working against it. But instead of confronting her, I decided to play the long game. I needed to be smart, to gather enough evidence to protect myself when the time came. Lisa thought she was the one pulling the strings, but she had no idea I was onto her. Her arrogance was her greatest weakness. She thought I was too predictable, too naive to see what was happening right under my nose. But she underestimated me, and as I sat in the quiet of our home, piecing together the puzzle of her deceit, I realized something. Lisa might have started this game, but I was going to finish it. The warning signs had been there all along. Now, it was time to turn them into my advantage. When Lisa left that note on the counter, she thought she had me cornered. She believed she'd won, that I'd be blindsided by her betrayal. But Lisa didn't realize I had been planning for this moment for months. While she was busy plotting her exit, I was quietly building a strategy to protect myself and everything I'd worked for. The realization that Lisa was working against me didn't come all at once. It was a slow, creeping awareness that grew stronger with every late-night call, every unexplained absence, and every offhand comment about my boring life. Once I was certain of her intentions, I knew I couldn't just sit back and let her destroy everything. If Lisa wanted a game, I'd play to win. The first step was securing the house. Lisa had always assumed we co-owned it, but I had refinanced the mortgage a year ago to consolidate our finances. What Lisa didn't know was that I had used that opportunity to transfer the title solely into my name. The house was my parents' legacy, a symbol of their hard work and love, and I wasn't going to let her take it from me. As far as Lisa knew, we still co-owned it, and I intended to keep it that way until the moment it mattered most. Next, I tackled our finances. Lisa had been dipping into our joint accounts for months, funding her extravagant lifestyle and, as I later discovered, her affair with Ryan. I quietly opened a separate account in my name and started redirecting my paychecks there. I left just enough in our joint accounts to keep her from getting suspicious, but I made sure she wouldn't have access to the bulk of our savings. By the time she left that note, I had already moved most of our funds into my private account. I also began documenting everything. Every suspicious charge on our credit card, every lie she told about her whereabouts, every piece of evidence that pointed to her affair. I kept a record of it all. I knew that if this ever came to court, I'd need proof of her betrayal. I even hired a private investigator to dig into her relationship with Ryan. The investigator uncovered more than I expected. Photos of Lisa and Ryan on lavish vacations, receipts for expensive dinners, and even evidence of Ryan's financial troubles. It turned out Lisa wasn't the only one scheming. Ryan was using her just as much as she was using me. The hardest part of my counterplan was maintaining the facade. Every day, I had to act as though I didn't know what was happening, as though I was still the oblivious, predictable husband Lisa thought I was. It wasn't easy. There were times when I wanted to confront her, to call her out on her lies and deceit. But I knew that acting impulsively would only give her the upper hand. I needed to wait until the moment was right. One evening, Lisa came home late, smelling of perfume that wasn't hers. She greeted me with a forced smile, her eyes darting around the room like she was afraid I might have noticed something. I played my part perfectly, asking her how her business meeting went and pretending not to see the guilt flickering across her face. Inside, I was seething, but outwardly, I was calm and composed. Lisa's arrogance blinded her to the fact that I was always one step ahead. I also started laying the groundwork for what would come next. I reached out to Mark, our real estate agent, and informed him that I was the sole owner of the house. I instructed him to notify me immediately if Lisa tried to list it for sale. I contacted a lawyer to ensure all my financial moves were legally sound, and I began preparing myself emotionally for the inevitable confrontation. Lisa thought she was untouchable, but I was about to show her just how wrong she was. In those months of planning, I discovered a strength within myself that I didn't know I had. Lisa's betrayal had shaken me to my core, but it also ignited a fire in me, a determination to protect what was mine and to ensure she couldn't take advantage of me any longer. I wasn't the passive, naive husband she believed me to be. I was strategic, resilient, and ready to fight for what I deserved. By the time Lisa left that note on the counter, my counterplan was already in motion. She thought she was delivering a devastating blow, but in reality, she was walking straight into the trap I had set. The game had begun, and I was ready to play. The morning after Lisa left her venomous note, I received a call from Mark, our real estate agent. I hadn't spoken to him in months, but his voice on the other end was enough to jolt me from my thoughts. "Hey, Michael. I got an unusual request from Lisa yesterday," he began cautiously. "She called, saying she wants to list the house for sale. I wanted to confirm with you before moving forward since, well, you're the sole owner." I leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of Mark's words settle in. Lisa had wasted no time in putting her grand plan into action. She really thought she could sell the house without my consent, without realizing she had no legal claim to it. It was almost laughable. Her arrogance and entitlement knew no bounds. "Mark, thanks for letting me know," I replied, keeping my tone even. "Let her think it's going to happen for now. But under no circumstances is that house going anywhere." Mark chuckled nervously, sensing there was more to the story than I was letting on. "Understood. I'll stall her if she asks for updates." After ending the call, I couldn't help but shake my head at Lisa's audacity. She hadn't even been gone for a full day and was already trying to dismantle the life we had built together. Well, the life I had built. She thought she had all the power, but she didn't realize the foundations of her plan were crumbling beneath her. That afternoon, Mark called me again. This time, he sounded amused. "Michael, you won't believe this. Lisa called me again, demanding to know why the house isn't listed yet. I told her we needed your signature, and she just about exploded." I laughed, picturing Lisa's fury. Her perfectly laid plans were unraveling, and she didn't even know why. What did she say? I asked. She accused me of being incompetent and told me to figure it out. I told her there's nothing to figure out. Your name's on the deed, and without your approval, nothing happens. Let's just say she wasn't happy. Good, I said simply. Keep me updated. Lisa's attempt to sell the house without my knowledge was just the beginning of her unraveling. She truly believed she could bully her way into getting what she wanted, but the legal roadblocks I had put in place were more than enough to stall her schemes. As I hung up the phone, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. The wheels of my plan were turning, and Lisa was walking straight into the trap I'd set. Later that evening, I went to the house to check on things. It felt different without Lisa there. Quieter, calmer, almost peaceful. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the suffocating weight of her presence. I took a deep breath, letting the stillness settle over me, and reminded myself of why I was fighting so hard to protect this place. It wasn't just a house. It was a symbol of my resilience, my independence, and the legacy I refused to let her tarnish. The next few days were eerily quiet. I knew Lisa wouldn't stay silent for long. She wasn't one to back down easily. Sure enough, she showed up at the house unannounced, banging on the door like a hurricane demanding to be let in. When I opened it, her face was a mixture of fury and desperation. "What the hell is going on, Michael?" she snapped, shoving past me into the living room. "Mark says you're blocking the sale of the house. Why?" I crossed my arms, leaning casually against the doorframe. "Because it's my house, Lisa. You don't have the right to sell it." Her eyes widened in disbelief. "What are you talking about? We bought this house together." I smirked, enjoying the moment more than I probably should have. "We did, but I refinanced it last year and put it in my name. So technically, this house belongs to me." Lisa's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. She was utterly unprepared for this revelation, and it showed. "You can't do that," she finally spat. "You can't just take the house." "I didn't take it," I said calmly. "I protected it. From you." For a moment, Lisa was speechless. Then, her anger boiled over. "You think you're so clever, don't you? Blocking me from selling the house? Freezing the accounts? What's your endgame, Michael?" I stepped closer, meeting her glare with unwavering calm. "My endgame is simple, Lisa. You don't get to destroy my life and walk away with everything. You made your choices. Now, you get to live with them." She stormed out, slamming the door behind her, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I had the upper hand. The house was safe, my plan was intact, and Lisa was scrambling. The game wasn't over yet, but I was finally playing to win. It didn't take long for Lisa to return after storming out of the house. Just 2 days later, she showed up again, pounding on the front door like it owed her money. I knew it was her before I even glanced through the peephole. Her furious knock was unmistakable. Part of me wanted to ignore her and let her stew in her anger, but I decided it was time to have the confrontation she was clearly itching for. When I opened the door, Lisa stood there with a wild look in her eyes, her phone clutched tightly in one hand. She wasted no time with pleasantries. "What's your problem, Michael?" she barked. "Why are you sabotaging everything?" "Good to see you too, Lisa," I said, leaning casually against the doorframe. "Care to clarify what I'm supposedly sabotaging?" She pushed past me, storming into the living room like it was still hers. "Don't play dumb," she snapped, spinning around to face me. "You blocked the sale of the house, froze the accounts, and you're acting like some petty little child who can't handle losing." Her words might have stung if they weren't so laughably ironic. "Losing?" I repeated, arching an eyebrow. "You mean the house I legally own and the accounts you drained without my consent? If anyone here is throwing a tantrum, it's not me." Lisa's jaw clenched, and I could see the gears turning in her head as she tried to come up with a rebuttal. "You're just being spiteful," she hissed. "You don't even need this house. You're doing this to punish me." "Punish you?" I let out a bitter laugh. "Lisa, you left a note saying you were taking everything, including the house. And now that you've realized you can't, I'm the bad guy? Give me a break." She crossed her arms, her posture stiff and defensive. "You're pathetic," she said coldly. Do you really think you're going to win this? I'll find a way to sell this house, Michael. Mark my words. I stepped closer, my voice calm but firm. No, you won't. Because I've already won. The house is in my name. The accounts are frozen. And your little plan? It's falling apart right in front of you. Lisa's face turned red with anger. You think you're so clever, she spat. But you don't know what you're doing. You'll regret this. Regret protecting what's mine? I said, shaking my head. I don't think so. And while we're at it, let's talk about all the money you siphoned off for your little shopping sprees and those luxury vacations with your business consultant friend. Her eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of panic in her expression. What are you talking about? She said, her voice faltering. Oh, don't play dumb, Lisa, I said, smirking. I know about Ryan. The private investigator I hired has been very thorough. I've got receipts, emails, even photos. You've been bleeding me dry for months while plotting to run off with him. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled to form a coherent response. You're lying, she finally said, but the tremor in her voice gave her away. I crossed my arms, letting the silence hang between us. Am I? I asked, because I've got a folder upstairs with everything I need to prove otherwise. Should I go get it? Lisa's bravado crumbled, and she sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. This wasn't supposed to happen, she muttered. You weren't supposed to fight back? I sighed, leaning against the armrest of a nearby chair. That's where you went wrong, Lisa. You underestimated me. You thought I'd roll over and let you take everything. But I'm not that guy anymore. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. Michael, please, we can fix this. I made a mistake, but we can start over. Just give me another chance. Her sudden shift from defiance to desperation was almost comical. Fix this? I repeated, my voice incredulous. You lied to me, stole from me, and tried to sell the house out from under me. There's no coming back from that. Lisa's tears turned to sobs, but I felt no pity for her. This was the bed she had made, and now she had to lie in it. I think we're done here, I said, gesturing toward the door. Take your tears and your regrets somewhere else. They don't work on me anymore. She stood, her shoulders slumped, and walked to the door without another word. As she stepped outside, she turned back to look at me, her expression a mix of anger and sorrow. You'll regret this, Michael, she said quietly. Maybe, I replied, but at least I'll still have my dignity. With that, I closed the door and locked it, leaning against it for a moment as I let out a deep breath. The confrontation was over, but the battle wasn't finished yet. I had a feeling Lisa wasn't done causing trouble, but neither was I. This wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about reclaiming my life and refusing to let her take another piece of it. The house felt unnervingly quiet after Lisa left. I stood in the middle of the living room, surrounded by the ghost of her anger and the echo of my own resolve. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I knew her well enough to realize that Lisa wasn't the type to walk away quietly. If anything, she'd double down, determined to claw back whatever control she thought she had left. But I wasn't the same man she once manipulated. It was time to reveal the full truth of her betrayal. I headed upstairs to retrieve the folder I'd prepared months ago, the one containing all the evidence of her deceit. The thick manila envelope felt heavier than it should, its contents a damning testament to just how far Lisa had gone to ruin me. I sat down at the dining table, flipping through the neatly arranged pages one more time, rehearsing how I would use this arsenal to take back control. Inside were bank statements highlighting her extravagant spending habits, a timeline of her secret withdrawals from our joint accounts, and copies of hotel receipts from her getaways with Ryan. The investigator I'd hired had also provided photographs of Lisa and her so-called business consultant, looking anything but professional. The cherry on top? Emails between the two of them, plotting their little escape using my hard-earned money. The evidence was as airtight as it was infuriating. Lisa's smug arrogance in believing I wouldn't notice her betrayal made my stomach churn. But as I stared at the damning proof, I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. My rage had been replaced by clarity, and with it came a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't about getting revenge. It was about drawing a line in the sand and finally standing up for myself. The next day, I decided to escalate matters. First, I called my lawyer to finalize the legal framework I'd set in motion. The accounts Lisa had drained were frozen, pending investigation. The house, fully secured in my name, was untouchable. Then, I made another call to Ryan. He picked up on the third ring, his voice dripping with the kind of fake confidence only a con artist could muster. "Michael," he said, dragging out my name like we were old friends. "What can I do for you?" "Cut the act, Ryan," I replied, my voice colder than I expected. "You know why I'm calling. It's about Lisa." There was a pause, followed by a chuckle. "Ah, yes, Lisa. She's quite something, isn't she?" "She is," I said evenly. "Quite the spender, too. Funny thing, did you know I have records of every dollar she's funneled into your little vacations? Or that I've got emails detailing your plans to use my money to fund your so-called business?" The silence on the other end was deafening. When Ryan finally spoke, his voice was quieter, less cocky. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you don't," I said. "Here's the deal. You're going to walk away from this, Ryan. Leave Lisa to clean up her mess and disappear from our lives. Because if you don't, I'll be handing all this evidence over to the authorities. And let's just say I doubt your gambling debts and fraudulent business practices would hold up under scrutiny." Another pause, this one longer than the last. "Fine," he muttered. "But you better stay out of my way, Michael." "Consider it mutual," I replied before hanging up. It felt like a small victory, but there was still one more person I needed to confront. I called Lisa and asked her to meet me at a neutral location, a coffee shop far from the house. She arrived late, her usual air of superiority intact, but I noticed the cracks in her armor. She looked tired, as if the weight of her unraveling schemes had begun to take its toll. "What do you want, Michael?" she snapped as she slid into the seat across from me. I placed the folder on the table between us, tapping it lightly. "This," I said. "Everything you've done, Lisa. The money you stole, the lies you told, the games you played. It's all here." She paled, her eyes darting to the folder like it might explode. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" I opened the folder and slid the first few pages toward her. Her hands trembled as she picked them up, her face going white as she scanned the evidence. "This isn't just about me anymore," I continued. "You've made choices, Lisa. Choices that have consequences." Her voice was shaky when she finally spoke. "Michael, I didn't mean for it to go this far." "That's the thing, Lisa," I said, leaning forward. "You didn't think it would go this far because you thought I'd let you walk all over me. But that ends now." She tried to bargain, to spin the narrative in her favor, but I was done listening. I left her there, sitting in stunned silence as the reality of her situation sank in. Walking out of that coffee shop, I felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time in years, I was the one holding all the cards. And this time, I wasn't going to let them go. The days following that coffee shop meeting were a whirlwind of legal maneuvers, frozen accounts, and frantic phone calls from Lisa. I ignored every single one. I was done engaging with her manipulative games. This was no longer a battle of wits. It was a dismantling of everything she thought she controlled. Her carefully constructed house of cards was collapsing, and I wasn't going to stick around to help her pick up the pieces. The first crack in her armor came when her credit card was declined. It didn't take long for Lisa to realize that the financial lifeline she had taken for granted was gone. I had rerouted what little remained in our joint accounts into a secured fund under my name. Every transaction she had initiated in the last 6 months was now under investigation, thanks to my lawyer's meticulous work. She came by the house one evening, banging on the door with a desperation I hadn't seen before. When I opened it, her usual air of confidence was replaced by panic. "Michael," she pleaded, her voice trembling, "you can't just cut me off like this. I need access to my money." "Your money?" I said, arching an eyebrow. "Lisa, the only money you had was what you siphoned off from me. And now, every cent of it is accounted for and frozen. You're the one who said you were done with me, remember?" Her face twisted in frustration. "You don't understand. Ryan, he left. He took what little I had and disappeared. I've got nothing left." The irony of her situation wasn't lost on me, but I refused to let her drag me back into her chaos. That sounds like a problem you created, Lisa. Not mine. She broke down, tears streaming down her face as she tried to appeal to my sense of compassion. Michael, please. I made a mistake. I didn't think it would turn out like this. You're right, I said, my voice steady. You didn't think. You didn't think about the consequences of betraying me, or about what would happen when your lies caught up to you. This is your mess to clean up now. I closed the door, her sobs muffled as I walked away. It wasn't easy to shut her out, but it was necessary. For too long, I had allowed her to manipulate me with her charm and crocodile tears. This time, I was choosing myself over her toxic games. In the meantime, word of Lisa's downfall began to spread. Friends who once admired her lavish lifestyle started distancing themselves. The facade she had worked so hard to maintain was crumbling under the weight of her actions. Even her family, who had always seemed to support her, began questioning her decisions. I heard through mutual acquaintances that her mother had refused to take her in, embarrassed by the scandal Lisa had created. Ryan's disappearance was the final nail in her coffin. He had taken advantage of her just as she had taken advantage of me, draining her financially before vanishing without a trace. The man she had risked everything for had left her with nothing but regret and a mountain of debt. I stayed focused on rebuilding my life. My work flourished, and I started spending more time with friends and colleagues who supported me through the turmoil. One of them, Greg, invited me to a networking event where I met people who reminded me of the value of genuine relationships. It was refreshing to be surrounded by individuals who valued integrity over appearances. Lisa, on the other hand, was drowning. Her attempts to contact me became more desperate, alternating between apologies and angry outbursts. I blocked her number, refusing to give her any more power over my emotions. Each day, I felt lighter, freer from the weight of her betrayal. One afternoon, I received a call from my lawyer. Michael, I have good news, he said. The investigation into Lisa's financial activities has concluded, and you're in the clear. The accounts she drained have been restored to you, and her claims on the house have been officially nullified. Relief washed over me. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of closure. Lisa's scheming had backfired spectacularly, leaving her to deal with the consequences alone. Meanwhile, I had not only survived but thrived in the aftermath of her betrayal. I stood in the living room of my house, the house she had tried to take from me, and felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Not for her actions, but for the lessons they had taught me. Lisa had underestimated me, but in doing so, she had unknowingly helped me discover a strength I didn't know I had. The fallout of her choices was her burden to bear. For me, it was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I no longer lived in her shadow. It was time to move forward, free from the toxicity she had brought into my life. The future was mine to shape, and for the first time in years, I felt ready to embrace it. When the dust settled and Lisa's presence in my life was reduced to mere echoes, I finally had the chance to focus on myself. For so long, I had been entangled in her web of manipulation, deceit, and entitlement that I'd forgotten what it felt like to simply breathe. Now, the air felt cleaner, the days brighter, and my future unshackled from her toxicity. The first step in moving forward was reclaiming the house, not just physically, but emotionally. Every corner had once been a battleground of arguments or a reminder of her contempt. I stripped it of all traces of her presence. The lavish decor she'd insisted on, the gaudy furniture she claimed gave the home character, and the extravagant but soulless trinkets. All of it was donated or discarded. In its place, I designed a home that reflected who I was and who I was becoming. Clean lines, practical furniture, and warm, inviting spaces became the new aesthetic. The house no longer felt like a shrine to her ego. It was now a sanctuary for me, a place where I could finally feel at peace. Work became another pillar in my rebuilding process. My role as a software developer had always been stable, but now I saw an opportunity to grow. With renewed focus, I poured myself into my projects, delivering results that earned me a promotion within months. The recognition felt like a validation of my abilities, not just as a professional, but as someone capable of standing tall despite the storm. Outside of work, I began reconnecting with people I'd lost touch with during my marriage. Lisa's controlling nature had often isolated me, subtly discouraging friendships and dismissing my social circles as beneath her. With her gone, I reached out to old friends like Greg and Carla, who welcomed me back into their lives with open arms. Their support was a reminder that genuine connections still existed, and they weren't contingent on appearances or wealth. Greg invited me to join a recreational basketball league he played in every Thursday night. At first, I hesitated. Sports hadn't been a part of my life in years, but eventually, I agreed. To my surprise, those weekly games became a highlight of my week. Running up and down the court, laughing with teammates, and celebrating small victories felt liberating. It was a stark contrast to the stifling life I'd lived with Lisa, where every moment felt like a performance for her approval. As I rebuilt my social life, I also took time for self-reflection. Therapy became an integral part of my journey. My therapist, Dr. Miller, helped me unpack the emotional toll of Lisa's betrayal and recognize the patterns that had led me to tolerate her behavior for so long. With each session, I gained clarity about my worth, my boundaries, and the kind of life I wanted to lead moving forward. One afternoon, I sat in my newly redecorated living room, flipping through old photo albums I'd stumbled upon while clearing out the house. Among the pictures were snapshots of happier times, before Lisa's true nature had fully revealed itself. In those moments, I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter or resentful. Instead, I felt a sense of closure. The life we'd shared was over, and though it had ended painfully, it had also taught me invaluable lessons about resilience, self-respect, and the importance of surrounding oneself with people who truly care. About 3 months after Lisa's departure, Greg invited me to a networking event for local entrepreneurs. At first, I was reluctant. Networking had never been my strong suit, but Greg insisted. "You never know who you'll meet," he said with a wink. The event was held in a sleek downtown loft, buzzing with energy and ambition. As I sipped on a cocktail and listened to people discuss their ventures, I found myself drawn to a woman standing by the window. Her laughter was genuine, her eyes warm, and her presence magnetic. Her name was Rachel, and she was an independent artist with a passion for creating murals that told stories of resilience and community. We struck up a conversation, and within minutes, I was captivated. Rachel wasn't just beautiful. She was grounded, compassionate, and refreshingly authentic. She listened intently as I shared my story, nodding with understanding and offering insights that felt wise beyond her years. For the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of hope, a possibility that life after Lisa could be not only different but better. As the weeks turned into months, Rachel and I grew closer. She became a confidant, a friend, and eventually, something more. Being with her was effortless. There were no games, no power struggles, just mutual respect and genuine affection. She helped me see that while Lisa's betrayal had been devastating, it had also cleared the path for something infinitely more fulfilling. Moving forward wasn't just about leaving Lisa behind. It was about embracing the person I was becoming. Stronger, wiser, and unafraid to demand the respect and love I deserved. For the first time in years, I felt truly alive, ready to face whatever challenges or joys lay ahead. It was inevitable that Lisa's world would start to crumble, and when it did, I watched from a distance, not with satisfaction, but with a detached clarity. After years of being manipulated, dismissed, and underestimated, witnessing her descent was like seeing the end of a chapter one had long since closed. It wasn't my intention to revel in her misery, but there was something undeniably affirming about knowing the choices she made were catching up to her. The first signs of her downfall came shortly after our confrontation. Word had spread among her social circle that she tried to take everything from me and failed spectacularly. Mutual friends, once charmed by her charisma and lavish lifestyle, began to distance themselves. Lisa had always thrived on appearances, and without the veneer of success and control, her influence waned. The curated image she'd built over the years started to crack, and the people she once considered allies slowly faded away. Her biggest blow, however, came from Ryan, the so-called business consultant, She had risked everything for turned out to be nothing more than a grifter. The private investigator I had hired uncovered Ryan's sordid history of deceit, phony credentials, a string of failed relationships, and mounting debts that made Lisa's betrayal of me seem almost comical. When Ryan realized that the money he'd hoped to siphon from Lisa was gone, he vanished without a trace, leaving her with nothing but unpaid bills and broken promises. Lisa tried to hold it together, but the pressure was relentless. She'd already drained her savings in anticipation of a future with Ryan, and with no access to the joint accounts I had frozen, she was left scrambling to cover her mounting expenses. Creditors began calling, her rent fell behind, and the luxury she once flaunted became an albatross around her neck. The woman who had always prided herself on being in control was now a portrait of desperation. I learned through mutual acquaintances that she had moved in with a friend, sharing a cramped apartment far removed from the opulence she once demanded. Her social media, once filled with glossy photos of extravagant trips and designer outfits, went silent. The few posts she did make were poorly veiled attempts to regain her old life, quotes about resilience and cryptic messages about new beginnings. To anyone who knew her, they were transparent cries for help. Despite everything, Lisa couldn't resist trying to drag me back into her chaos. She called me one evening, her voice shaky and unsteady. "Michael, I need to talk," she began. The usual arrogance replaced with something I hadn't heard in years: vulnerability. I stayed silent, letting her fill the void. She rambled about how she'd made mistakes, how Ryan had betrayed her, how she was struggling to keep her head above water. She even apologized, though it felt more like an attempt to garner sympathy than a genuine admission of guilt. "You were right about everything," she said finally, her voice breaking. "I was wrong to treat you the way I did." For a brief moment, I felt a pang of pity. Lisa was still the woman I had once loved, and seeing her reduced to this version of herself was painful. But I couldn't let her draw me back into her web. "Lisa," I said, my tone steady, "I hope you find your way, but I can't be a part of this anymore. You made your choices, and I've made mine. Take care of yourself." She tried to protest, but I ended the call before she could say more. As I set the phone down, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. For the first time, I wasn't reacting to her manipulation or trying to salvage what couldn't be saved. I was choosing peace. The fallout of Lisa's choices extended beyond her personal life. The financial investigation into her and Ryan's fraudulent activities uncovered irregularities that led to legal trouble. While she managed to avoid jail time, the fines and restitution she owed were staggering. Her once glamorous life was now a daily struggle to make ends meet. Meanwhile, my life continued to flourish. The company I had built with hard work and dedication was thriving, and my relationship with Rachel brought me a sense of fulfillment I hadn't known was possible. I had surrounded myself with people who valued honesty, kindness, and mutual respect, the very things Lisa had taken for granted. Watching Lisa fall wasn't about revenge or schadenfreude. It was a stark reminder of the consequences of her actions and the strength it took to break free from her influence. Her betrayal had tested me in ways I never anticipated, but it also showed me the depth of my resilience. In the end, Lisa's downfall wasn't my victory, it was her reckoning. And as I moved forward with my life, I found solace in knowing that I had emerged from the storm stronger, wiser, and more grounded than ever before. Standing in the middle of my living room, sunlight pouring through the windows, I reflected on how far I'd come. It had been months since Lisa's last attempt to reach out. Months since I'd made the decision to put her betrayal behind me for good. The house, once a battleground of resentment and unspoken truths, now felt like a sanctuary. Each carefully chosen piece of furniture and every small detail reflected the life I was building, one of peace, strength, and self-respect. The day Lisa reached out again, I wasn't surprised. Her voice on the phone was a mix of desperation and regret, much like the last time we spoke. "Michael," she began hesitantly, "can we meet? Just once? I need to see you." I paused, considering her words. Part of me wanted to refuse outright, to avoid reopening old wounds. But another part of me, the part that had grown stronger through all this, felt it was time for closure. "Okay," I replied. One conversation. That's all. We met at a quiet cafe downtown. Lisa arrived first, seated at a corner table, her once confident posture now hunched. She looked different, tired, worn, and somehow smaller than I remembered. When she saw me, her face lit up briefly, but it quickly faltered under my calm, unwavering gaze. "Michael," she started, her voice breaking slightly, "I've thought about what I did, about what I lost. I don't even know where to begin apologizing." I listened as she spoke, recounting the series of choices that led to her downfall. She admitted she had been blinded by greed and excitement, chasing a fantasy life that crumbled as soon as reality set in. Ryan's betrayal, the financial ruin, and the isolation she faced had forced her to confront the truth about herself. "I was wrong about everything," she said, tears streaming down her face. "You didn't deserve any of it. I thought I could do better, but I see now that I threw away the best thing I ever had. I'm so sorry, Michael. If there's any chance—" "There isn't," I interrupted gently but firmly. "Lisa, I appreciate your apology. Truly, I do. But this isn't about forgiveness or second chances. It's about moving forward. I've built a life that doesn't include the chaos and pain of our past, and I intend to protect that." She nodded, her expression a mixture of heartbreak and acceptance. "I understand," she whispered. "I just needed to tell you that I'm sorry." I stood, signaling the end of the conversation. "I wish you well, Lisa. I really do. But this is goodbye." Walking out of that cafe, I felt an overwhelming sense of closure. For years, I had carried the weight of her betrayal, the sting of her disdain, and the bitterness of what could have been. But now, I was free. I had faced the past head-on and emerged unshaken, ready to embrace the future with open arms. Back at home, Rachel was waiting for me. She had been my anchor through the storm, her unwavering support and kindness reminding me of what real partnership looked like. When I walked through the door, her smile was like sunlight breaking through clouds. "How did it go?" she asked softly, wrapping her arms around me. "It went as it needed to," I replied, pulling her close. "I've said my goodbyes." Rachel didn't press further. She didn't need to. She understood me in ways Lisa never had, and that understanding brought a sense of peace I hadn't known was possible. Together, we shared dinner, laughing over inside jokes and making plans for the future. That evening, as I stood on the balcony overlooking the city, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The pain of Lisa's betrayal, the slow process of rebuilding, and the unexpected joy of finding love again had all shaped me into the man I was now. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine, filled with purpose, hope, and a renewed sense of self. Lisa's chapter in my life was closed, not with anger or regret, but with acceptance. She had been a part of my story, but she no longer defined it. As I held Rachel's hand and gazed at the stars, I knew this was the beginning of something extraordinary. The past was behind me. The future was wide open. And for the first time in years, I felt truly, completely free.